Hello, and welcome to Chapter 6, Accountability. So in this video, we're going to talk specifically about NCLB and the accountability measures. So why do we need accountability? This is a very difficult topic to discuss amongst especially education majors, but it is very important to keep in mind. Turnbull makes these points, the four major influences that influence this era of accountability, the advances in technology by our economic competitors, so we're still competing with the rest of the world, even though the 50s are over. But I think even the rest of the world is also trying to compete with themselves and also the United States. Low achievement scores of the U.S., talked about that with the PISA tests or the TIMSS tests. We continue to run in the middle of the pack. One interesting note on that is the very low scores for student happiness. So that's also very interesting. The diversity of America tends to, because when you look at those PISA scores, you have to take into account that the students that are tested for these international tests are supposed to be representative of the larger population. So this would include potentially students with disabilities, but it also definitely includes different races, ethnicities, genders, all those types of things. So when we look at the inequalities in America, you can perhaps see why the scores would not be as high as we might imagine. Other countries around the world tend to weed out children, individuals, do not have the diversity and inequalities, well, potential inequalities that the United States might have. So anyway, a little bit of a tangent, but just remember a couple of those points. The need for the well-trained domestic workforce. You can see this very well in how Indiana has set up its university systems, like the IUPUI, Indiana University at the different locations. IU Fort Wayne, IU Evansville, they're all over the place. And so the point is that they want individuals to be well trained academically and to stay in those certain spots in Indiana. Otherwise, they would be moving to Indianapolis, and perhaps that's all. So we do need a very well trained domestic workforce. Civil rights movements, of course, play into this, and you see the influence of the civil rights movement when we get into some of the laws. I'm going to go through just quickly. You know these: 1954, Brown versus Board. The Civil Rights Act of 64, prohibiting discrimination. Title IX in 72, discrimination based on sex. National Defense of Education in 58, so not too far after 54, but again, I think National Defense Education Act was more for the idea that Sputnik had just launched and the U.S. was falling behind in the space race. So there you see that happening. The evolving state and local and larger government federal reforms. We know a lot of these, especially the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1988, which begins Title I funds, and then later on the reauthorization is stemming from 65, the reauthorization in 2002, which bore the name No Child Left Behind. Some interesting laws, particularly pertaining to special education. We have the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, which I think we should definitely hang our hat on it in 1975. This, of course, the PL 94-142 later becomes IDEA. Section 504, prohibiting any discrimination based upon disability. This broadens ideas for education, and then Section 504 broadens this And 1990, the reauthorization basically with the Americans with Disability Act, the ADA, broad civil rights law, very important idea there. Following these, we want to make sure, and I want to make sure that we point to the parents' rights. So these laws, definitely helped usher in the role of the parent. So understanding that these laws and the letter of the law and the spirit of the law really points to consent or the refuse to consent to services for parents. So sometimes parents may not want services for the child based upon, in some cases, the labeling that has to go with that. Parents do have the right to consent to some of the services that might be offered. Parents also have the right to participate in developing the individual family service plan or the IEP. So really, big key takeaway here about parents' rights: not only can they consent to all services, they can refuse all services, they can go specifically for certain services, but basically they have the right to be full-fledged educational decision makers. So once their child is labeled with a disability, and this could be something that begins very early on, even from birth, that parents have this right, and it is really important that we keep this in mind as we move forward. NCLB, going back to NCLB, our beloved NCLB, the General Education Reform. Here we go. 6 principles. I'm going to go through them as best I can here, as clearly as I can. I may skip some of the parts, but make sure that you're taking notes or focusing on some of the key issues that I discuss. Number 1, accountability for results. So children were not being prepared well enough for college and moving into the real world, and of course everybody has to go to college. I'm winking. But the major purpose and provisions is that every child can demonstrate proficiency when they graduate high school. And how do they demonstrate proficiency? Through these standards. Standards developed, whether they be by Pearson or whoever else. These at least set a level, and pretty much every country has standards. So this is not just the United States. Every country in the world has these standards, pretty much every country. But it basically lets us know where the children are and where they need to go to be proficient when they leave schooling, at least the standard schooling as is high school. 95% of students must be assessed. We know that. Students with disabilities are included. And some might have accommodations, but there are, and Turnbull makes this point, very few that take an alternative assessment, although they do exist. No child left behind means no child left untested, and that is, I know it's a cliche, but it is true. And for good or bad, we must take that into account because that is law. Now, implications for family-professional relationships mean that the child must report, we must report the child's results to parents and performance of the whole school with options if not meeting the AYP. So what this means is that teachers of children with disabilities are accountable for helping them make adequate yearly progress. This is for every single student, even your gifted kids. But this is really important to remember. This didn't happen before. Before, it was children with special needs could just float through the system, and if they got something, they got something. If they didn't, they didn't, and who knows? Well, now there's accountability, and whether you like NCLB or not, at least we have a measure of the progress that children are making. Whether it's a good measure or not, I have no idea. We'll talk about that another day. Number 2, so accountability. Number 2, school safety. There were issues of bullying and other safety issues. There still are. But directly related to students with disability is this quote: does the student's behavior directly relate or result from the student's disability? This is really important because if a student has a disability, like an emotional disturbance in one of the categories that we're going to talk about here in a minute, it could have been before that you could just expel the student, they'd go to a different school, put them into a disability school, right? Or those kids over there, they're all emotionally disturbed, we can't have them with the general population. No, we need to take into account the student's disability. NCLB does that for us. There is this little provision, and Turnbull makes this point, and you can read a little bit more about it, but this educator's right to be safe, and I think that that is safe to say important because we sometimes forget that educators also have rights. We're people too. Although people don't take us as people sometimes, we're just teachers. This is a fairly important idea. Number 3, parent choice for failing schools. I dislike number 3 enormously. I'm not a big fan of charter schools. However, let me say that's especially because many of them can be for profit, and the federal government, your state tax dollars can go to the startup of charter schools. And if you like them, that's great and that's wonderful, and maybe they work for you, and some do work. Some are extremely innovative. I've seen success stories of extremely innovative schools that do research-based teaching, whole school methods, and it's beautiful. However, some can be for profit, and I'm not for profit education personally. Very important that parents of children with disabilities understand this choice. They may want to go to a charter school as you may get more personalized attention. They may not. That would be their choice though. Teacher quality, highly qualified teacher, we go through that. You'd have to look into your state as to what it means to be a highly qualified teacher. It used to be that you had to have a master's degree in Ohio, and that is no longer the case. And now highly qualified, well, you'd have to look it up to find out specifically for your state. Scientifically based methods, we know that we have to use research-based methods. Number 6, local flexibility, local solutions to local problems. So theoretically, local educational administrations, the boards of education, could allocate more funding for students with special needs. Whether this happens or not is another story. Basically, big point, big wrap up here, the laws have led to more rights, more opportunities, and for you as the educator or person who is this interlochen, this person who is the go-between, this is really setting the stage for more partnerships, and we must educate not only ourselves about the laws. So if there's anything here that I did not go over, I do ask that you send me a question. I also ask that you do a little bit of extra searching. There's the excellent PDF all about IDEA, and the other piece of this is that the third piece is you need to educate the parents about their rights and all of the responsibilities that come from rights. So thanks for listening, and see you next time.